If you'd told me that spending a night alone in a freezing train depot with a stranger would turn out to be one of the most unexpectedly meaningful experiences of my life, I probably would have laughed and walked away. But here I am, still trying to wrap my head around how a random power outage, a nearly empty train station, and one awkward, shivering guy turned into something I didn't see coming. It all started at some ungodly hour last Friday night. I was just trying to get home after seeing my friend's band play downtown. The last train was supposed to get me back to my neighborhood by midnight, but apparently the universe had other plans. The train had been delayed, then delayed again, and eventually, they announced all service was being suspended until further notice because of a massive power failure affecting the whole city. So there I was, stuck in this old train depot that felt more like a ghost town than a transit hub. The fluorescent lights flickered weakly overhead, and the temperature was dropping fast. I was pacing, scrolling through my phone for any updates or a rideshare option, but no luck. The place was nearly empty, except for this one other guy. He was sitting on one of those cold metal benches way across the platform, looking just as miserable as I felt. He caught my eye a couple of times, maybe because we were the only two left there, and maybe because the whole situation was just so weird. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I walked over to him. He looked up, surprised, but then smiled a little. His name was Alex, and he was heading home from visiting family out of town. We started talking, mostly about how ridiculous the whole blackout and train shutdown was. The more we talked, the more the tension of waiting around felt less suffocating. But then the temperature really started to plummet. I could see his breath cloud in the air, and my teeth were beginning to chatter. The depot might have had a roof, but it felt like standing outside in the middle of nowhere. Alex looked over at me and said something that caught me off guard. We should share body heat. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking. But the way he looked at me, half serious and half smirking, made me realize he wasn't. There we were, two strangers, stuck in the middle of the night in an empty train station with nothing but the cold in each other. And something about that simple offer felt way more intimate than either of us expected. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. Sitting here, arms tentatively reaching out, wondering how the hell I ended up about to snuggle up with a guy the first barely know just to stay warm. And honestly, I'm kind of glad I did. Because sometimes, the weirdest situations are the ones where you find something real. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning so you understand how a night like this even happened. So, we ended up scooting closer on that cold bench, which felt awkward at first. I mean, here I was, a guy who usually keeps his space bubble pretty wide, and now I was sharing the kind of proximity that only happens when you're trying not to freeze to death. Alex shifted a bit too, pulling his jacket tighter around him, and I did the same, trying not to think about how this whole thing was starting to feel strangely comforting. We stayed silent for a bit. The station was eerily quiet, except for some faint hum from the emergency lights and the occasional distant rumble, which I guessed was the city still going on somewhere beyond these walls. The cold wasn't just outside, it seeped into your bones. I kept glancing over at Alex, noticing the way his eyes caught the weak light, how his hands were clasped in his lap, fingers tapping a slow rhythm. There was something about him that made me feel less alone, even though we barely knew each other. So, I finally said, breaking the silence, "What's your story? Besides being stuck in a frozen ghost town with me, I mean." He smiled then, a little shy, like he wasn't used to chatting with strangers in situations like this. Honestly, I was just trying to get home. Long day visiting family, you know? Thought I'd be back hours ago. Now here we are, stuck in the middle of nowhere. He laughed softly, and I realized it was the kind of laugh that masked being tired and a little frustrated. "Yeah," I said. "Same here. I was at a friend's show. Not exactly the glamorous Friday night I imagined." I shook my head, trying to laugh off the disappointment. "Guess we're both experts in bad timing." "Bad timing, or maybe just weird luck," he said, his voice low, almost thoughtful. That got me thinking. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was the universe throwing a curveball just to put us in this exact moment, sharing body heat in a dead train depot. The idea felt almost ridiculous, but also kind of right. We talked more after that. Just small stuff at first, like favorite bands, dumb movies, what part of the city we lived in. Turns out, Alex worked as a graphic designer, which explained the casual, artsy vibe he gave off. I told him about my job at the bookstore downtown, and we joked about how neither of us seemed prepared for this kind of adventure. Somewhere along the way, the conversation got quieter, more thoughtful. We stopped trying to fill every second with words, and just sat there, sharing the cold and the silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was like we were both waiting for something, though I wasn't sure what. At one point, Alex shifted again, and I felt the warmth of his arm brush against mine. It was subtle, but enough to make me notice how tense I'd been holding myself. Without thinking, I moved a little closer, and he didn't pull away. Instead, he gave me this look, half question, half invitation, that made my heart skip. I told myself it was just the cold making me overthink things. But then he said, "You know, this isn't so bad. It's kind of nice, actually." Yeah, I agreed, surprised at how genuine I sounded. Nice to not be alone. The night stretched on, and the temperature didn't budge. We stayed close, sharing stories, laughter, and that quiet feeling of connection that doesn't need words. At some point, I realized I was actually looking forward to whatever came next. Not just the train starting up again, but whatever this was between us. When the emergency lights flickered again, signaling the power might be coming back, a tiny pang of disappointment hit me. I wasn't ready for this moment to end. Not because I was desperate or anything, but because I'd found something rare in a place I never expected. Before I could say anything, Alex turned to me and said, "Maybe next time we get stuck somewhere, we should plan for it. Share some blankets or something." I laughed, but my chest felt tight. "Yeah, or just make sure we're together." He smiled, that same shy, hopeful smile from earlier, and for a second, the cold felt like a distant memory. In the middle of that empty train depot, under flickering lights and a city blackout, we found something warm. Something that maybe wasn't supposed to happen that night, but did anyway. And honestly, I'm glad it did. After that, the power hiccuped a few times. Those brief moments where the lights would flare up, then die again, like the station was struggling to wake up but wasn't quite ready. Each flicker seemed to underline how suspended in time we were, two guys stuck in a strange bubble far away from anything familiar. I guess it was the closeness, or maybe just the weird magic of a shared experience nobody would ever really believe. But I found myself wanting to know more about Alex. Not just the surface stuff, like what bands he liked or how long he'd been stuck, but what made him tick. So I asked, "Okay, serious question," I said, giving him a sideways look. "What's something most people don't know about you?" He hesitated, that small smile fading into something softer, almost vulnerable. "I don't know if this counts, but I'm pretty shy, like way more than I let on. People usually think I'm confident because of my job or how I dress, but it's mostly a front." I nodded slowly, surprised by the honesty. It felt like he'd peeled back a layer I wasn't expecting. "I get that," I said. "I've got my own armor too. Books and sarcasm mostly." He chuckled, and for the first time, I caught the way his eyes crinkled at the corners. The kind of smile that feels real, not just polite. "I guess we're both experts in hiding," he said softly. Maybe, I agreed. But sometimes, when the world shuts down, literally, in our case, it's nice to drop the act. We stayed quiet again, but this time it wasn't the cold making it hard to speak. It was the weight of something settling between us. Like we'd crossed some unspoken line, and the silence was where all the questions and possibilities lived. After a while, Alex shifted so he was facing me more directly, his knees almost touching mine now. His breath was visible in the cold air, and I became painfully aware of my own heartbeat, loud and uneven in my chest. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Shoot," I replied, suddenly nervous, like a kid waiting for a test result. "Do you think this could be more than just a weird night stuck together?" He sounded hesitant, like he wasn't sure if I'd laugh or run. I blinked. Honestly, I'd been thinking about that exact question since we first moved closer. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think it could be." That admission felt like a crack in the ice, and somehow it made the cold feel a little less biting. We talked more about what we wanted. No, needed from life. Stuff that usually gets buried under day-to-day noise. Alex said he'd been tired of casual sleep-togethers and small talk, craving something real. I confessed I'd been feeling the same way, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself yet. By then, the power was almost back fully, and the station was starting to buzz with the distant sounds of trains coming to life. I realized with a pang that our time in this frozen, quiet world was running out. "I guess this is it," I said, my voice low. Alex nodded, but didn't move away. Instead, he reached out and took my hand. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it was everything. "Maybe we don't have to wait for some blackout to meet like this," he said, voice steady. I squeezed his hand, feeling warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with body heat. "I'd like that." When the first train rolled into the station, bright lights flooding the platform, it felt like the world was waking up around us. But I didn't want to move. Not yet. Alex laughed softly. "Well, this was definitely the weirdest first date I've ever had." "Same," I said, smiling wide despite the cold. "But maybe the best one too." We stood up together, shoulders brushing, and started walking toward the exit. The night outside was cold and dark, but somehow that didn't matter anymore. Because I wasn't alone. Not really. Not anymore. And honestly, I can't wait to see what happens next. The cold hit us full force as we stepped out from the warmth of the depot into the early morning air. The city was waking up, streetlights flickering off, distant cars humming, a few early risers shuffling along sidewalks bundled against the chill. I wrapped my jacket tighter around me, but this time the cold didn't feel quite as sharp. Alex fell into step beside me, our shoulders brushing occasionally. The awkwardness from the depot had faded into this comfortable rhythm that made me wonder how two strangers who just shared body heat overnight could feel so connected. "So," I said, trying to break the silence without making it weird, "you live around here?" He nodded, glancing over with that shy smile. "Yeah, about 10 minutes from here. You?" "Not too far. Just across the river." I realized we'd spent almost the entire night talking about everything except what came next. "Think we're crazy for making the trek on foot this early?" "Maybe," he said, laughing softly. "But it beats waiting for a bus that might never come." We walked past empty coffee shops and shuttered newsstands, the sky slowly brightening with the first hints of dawn. It felt like the city was stretching after a long sleep, and somehow, so were we. "You know," Alex said after a beat, "I never got your number." I laughed. "Oh man, the classic misstep." He fished his phone out of his pocket, holding it out. "Fix that." I pulled out my own and typed in my details, handing it back. "There, now you can remind me never to get stuck in a power outage without you." He grinned. "Deal." For a moment, we just walked, the quiet between us easy and natural. Then Alex stopped beside a small park, the grass still damp with dew. "Hey," he said, looking a little nervous. "I know this is sudden, but do you want to grab breakfast? There's a place around the corner that's open early." I hesitated, caught off guard by how much I wanted to say yes. "Yeah, that sounds good." We crossed the street and found ourselves in a tiny diner, all warm light and clatter of dishes. The kind of place where you could sit for hours and not feel rushed. We slid into a booth by the window, ordering coffee and eggs without much thought. Sitting there, the conversation flowed like it had the night before. Easy, honest, with little bursts of laughter. We swapped stories about our families, our childhoods, things we usually keep locked down tight. I felt like I was peeling back layers, getting closer to someone I barely knew but already trusted. At one point, Alex reached across the table and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. It was such a small gesture, but it lit something in me, a warmth deeper than any blanket could provide. "Do you ever think about how weird life is?" he asked quietly. "All the time." I admitted. "Like how we ended up here right now." He nodded, eyes soft. "Yeah, it's crazy how a blackout in a cold train station can change everything." I smiled, feeling a spark of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe the universe knows what it's doing, even when it feels like chaos. Our breakfast plates emptied, but neither of us seemed eager to leave. Outside, the city roared back to life, buses and cars filling the streets. But in that little bubble of booth and coffee, it felt like time had slowed just for us. Eventually, Alex glanced at his watch and sighed. I should head home. Work's probably back on. Yeah, I said, not wanting the morning to end but knowing it had to. Same here. We stood up and for a moment just held onto each other's hands, like neither of us wanted the connection to break. Hey, Alex said, voice low. I know this was all kind of sudden, but can we do this again? Like, not just because of a blackout? I grinned, feeling more certain than I ever had. Absolutely. As we parted ways on the sidewalk, the sun finally breaking fully over the horizon, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected nights lead to the best beginnings. And somehow, sharing body heat in a freezing train depot wasn't just about staying warm anymore. It was about finding someone who made the cold worth it. After that morning, things felt different, like the blackout had cracked open some hidden door I didn't even know was there. I kept replaying the night and the quiet moments over coffee, how easy it was to talk to Alex, and how even in the cold I never once felt alone. It was weird, honestly. You meet someone in the most random situation, and suddenly everything shifts. We started texting the next day, a mix of silly memes and actual conversations that stretched into the night. It wasn't just small talk. He had a way of asking questions that made me think, and I found myself opening up more than usual. One night, I told him about a book I'd been too shy to share with anyone, and he surprised me by saying he wanted to read it too. That felt like a big deal. A few days later, we met up at the same diner from that first breakfast. It was quiet, a little tucked away, with that familiar smell of coffee and old vinyl playing softly in the background. Alex was already there when I walked in, reading something on his phone, and I noticed how natural it felt to see him waiting. No nerves gnawing at my stomach, just this warm, steady feeling. We spent hours that day just talking about art and music, fears and dreams, the kind of stuff you usually keep locked away, but somehow felt safe sharing with him. I caught myself staring sometimes, wondering how I'd never noticed how kind his eyes were, or how his smile crinkled at the edges when he laughed. On a walk afterward, the city had that early spring vibe, buds just starting to bloom, the sun warm but gentle. We ended up sitting on a bench by the river, watching the water move slow and steady. There was this quiet understanding between us, like we didn't need to fill every second with words. You know, Alex said after a while, I wasn't sure about how this would go at first. Being stuck in that freezing depot with you, it felt surreal. But now, I'm glad the power went out. I smiled, feeling a flutter in my chest. Me too. It's funny how the worst situations can sometimes lead to the best things. He looked at me then, his gaze steady and soft. I want to see where this goes. No rush, no pressure, just whatever feels right. That honesty hit me harder than I expected. Same here. We didn't become some whirlwind couple overnight. It was slow, steady, like learning a new song by heart. We had awkward moments, like when I tried to cook for him and almost set off the smoke alarm, or when he accidentally spilled coffee on my favorite book. But every little thing felt real, and it made the connection stronger. One evening, a few weeks in, Alex invited me over to his place. His apartment was cozy, with framed prints on the walls and plants by the window. We cooked dinner together. Well, I mostly watched while he worked his magic in the kitchen, and then settled on the couch with mismatched blankets and a terrible movie playing on the TV. At some point, the movie faded into the background, and the room felt quieter, softer. I realized I was sitting closer to him than before, our legs touching, hands brushing. I looked up, catching the way his eyes searched mine. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, voice low. My heart was pounding, but I nodded before I could overthink it. The kiss was gentle, slow, like the first notes of a song that felt familiar but new. When we pulled apart, Alex grinned, that shy, hopeful smile again. From that night on, things felt different. Like we'd crossed a threshold, and there was no going back to the way things were before. I started to notice the little ways he made me feel safe. His hand on my back in crowded places, the way he remembered tiny details about my day, how his voice softened when he said my name. But it wasn't all perfect. There were moments when doubts crept in, old insecurities, fears I hadn't fully faced. Sometimes I wondered if this was all just too good to be true. Alex had his own worries too, things he didn't always share right away. One rainy afternoon, sitting in his apartment while the city soaked outside, I asked him about those things. He hesitated, then opened up about past relationships that left scars, about feeling like he wasn't enough sometimes. Listening to him, I felt my own guard come down completely. "You're more than enough," I told him quietly. "I'm here, not just for the good stuff, but everything." He reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you. That means more than I can say." The rain tapped against the window, but inside, the world felt warm and safe. Looking back, I never would have guessed that a powerless train station could lead to all this. But maybe that's the thing about life. It throws these curveballs that don't make sense until you're right in the middle of them. And standing here now, with Alex beside me, I'm ready to see where this story goes. Because sometimes, the coldest nights lead to the warmest beginnings. As the weeks passed, the rhythm between Alex and me settled into something steady. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it was real. And honestly, that was what I needed. I started looking forward to our late-night texts, the way his name would pop up on my screen with some random thought, or a bad pun that made me laugh when I least expected it. I caught myself smiling more, feeling lighter even on the rough days. One Saturday afternoon, Alex invited me over for a movie marathon. He warned me it'd be low-key, just some old classics and junk food. I wasn't expecting much, but as soon as I stepped into his apartment, the little details pulled me in. The way he'd rearranged his bookshelf since the last time I'd been there, the scent of vanilla candles burning softly on the coffee table, and that familiar warmth that seemed to follow him everywhere. We settled in, sprawled across his couch with a mountain of popcorn in front of us. Somewhere between the third movie and the fourth, the power flickered and went out again. I laughed, shaking my head. "Seriously, another blackout?" Alex shrugged, grinning. "Guess we're cursed." The room went dark except for the soft glow from his laptop screen, which still had some battery left. We looked at each other, and without saying a word, I moved closer. The cold air that slipped in through a cracked window suddenly felt sharper, but this time I wasn't worried about it. "I think I'm going to need you to share some of that body heat again," I joked. He laughed, the sound warm and easy, and shifted so our shoulders were touching. I felt a familiar comfort in the closeness, like everything else faded away. The city outside buzzed with life, but right there, in that darkened apartment, it was just USA as the night deepened. The conversation grew softer, more intimate. We talked about our families, childhood memories, and the little things that shaped us. Those quiet moments that don't get shared often, but mean everything. I found myself opening up about fears I'd tucked away, things I never thought I'd say out loud. Alex listened without judgment, his hand finding mine in the dark. "You're braver than you realize," he said softly. "Sharing that with me, it means a lot." His words settled over me like a blanket, warm and steady. For the first time, I felt like I had someone who truly saw me, flaws and all, and still wanted to be there. A few days later, we took a walk through the city park, the air crisp and bright. The trees were starting to show early buds, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. We meandered along the paths, talking about plans for the summer, silly dreams, and things we wanted to try. At one point, Alex stopped and turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "I've been thinking," he said, a little hesitantly, "about us, about what this is." I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah? I don't want to rush or force anything," he continued, "but I want to be with you. Like, really be with you. Not just these stolen moments, but everything." I swallowed hard, feeling more ready than I ever expected. "I want that too." We stood there for a moment, the world around us buzzing with spring life, and I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But life has a funny way of reminding you that even when things feel perfect, they're still complicated. A week later, I got a call from my sister. her voice tight and urgent. My mom had been in an accident and was in the hospital. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. Suddenly, the world outside my apartment felt cold and distant. I told Alex as much as I could over the phone, my voice shaky. Without hesitation, he showed up at my door later that evening, carrying a bag of essentials and that same calm presence I'd come to lean on. "I'm here," he said simply, holding out his hand. In the following days, I bounced between hospital visits and work, the stress and exhaustion weighing heavy. But Alex was there, bringing me coffee, sitting with me in sterile waiting rooms, his hand never letting go of mine. One night, after a particularly rough day, I broke down in his arms. The fear, the uncertainty, it all poured out, and he just held me, whispering that we'd get through it together. That moment, raw and real, changed something between us. It wasn't just about the good times anymore, but about standing together through the hard ones, too. When my mom started to get better, we found ourselves sitting in a quiet cafe, the soft hum of chatter around us. Alex reached across the table, fingers entwining with mine. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly, "for being so strong." I smiled, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you." He squeezed my hand gently, and in that simple touch, I felt the promise of something lasting. Looking back, it's crazy to think that all this started because of a blackout in a freezing train depot. But maybe that's the thing about life. It throws you into the cold, and if you're lucky, someone's there to share their warmth. And with Alex, I'm ready to face whatever comes next. Months had passed since that night in the train depot, the night that somehow sparked all of this. Life, with its usual mix of chaos and calm, had settled into a new rhythm with Alex by my side. Some days were still tough. Mom's recovery was slow but steady. Work had its ups and downs, but having him there made everything feel manageable. Like no matter what curveballs came our way, I wasn't facing them alone. One evening, we found ourselves back at that same little diner where it all began, the place glowing warmly under strings of soft lights. It wasn't a grand gesture or a fancy date, just two guys who'd come a long way from shivering strangers sharing body heat. We sat in our usual booth, the familiar clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation creating a comforting backdrop. Alex reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine with that easy confidence I'd come to cherish. "Do you remember that night?" he asked, eyes sparkling with that same shy warmth. "How could I forget?" I replied, smiling. "Feels like a lifetime ago," he chuckled. "Funny how a blackout and a freezing station brought us here." "Yeah," I said softly, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones." We sat together for a while, just talking and laughing, the kind of easy connection that only grows with time. And as the night deepened, I realized something I'd felt for a while but hadn't said out loud. "Alex," I started, my voice steady but full of something I couldn't quite put into words. "I'm really glad you were there that night, and every day since. You've changed my life." He looked at me, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I feel the same way." There wasn't a big speech or dramatic declaration, just two people who had found something real in the messiness of life, something worth holding on to. As we walked out into the cool night air, shoulders brushing, I felt that familiar warmth, the kind that has nothing to do with cold benches or shared blankets. It was the warmth of knowing someone sees you, accepts you, and chooses to stay. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted.